Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Here we are with the next episode of the Immergence Show. I'm Nico Farah, your host. I have my co-host with me, Noreen Solomon and Philip Striffling. We will be talking about a very important topic today. That every single one of us, no matter what age or gender or demographic we have, we're dealing with it. And that is the social responsibility. We will talk about the definition. We will talk about what's happening in the world and how these are impacting our lives. Again, depending on what geographical area that we are, each of these are going to impact us differently. And we will touch on some regulations that are important for the builders of this space to know, for the users to know, and we'll probably go deeper into the regulations that are very, very important and informative, and it was for us, and I'm sure it will be for you as well, in a fun way, probably in the next session. We have around an hour time frame, and we want to also touch on something fun and relevant. Today's Halloween here in the US, and Noreen is a cultural anthropologist. So she would give us some history of where the Halloween came from. I think that would be pretty interesting for everyone. When I first heard it, that was quite interesting. We all think we know it, but not fully. So wait till the end to hear the full history from our amazing co-host. So before we get started, I will give a quick introduction of everyone, and then we go through our agenda. So I'm a technologist, and I've been doing several businesses in the retail tech space. So using online platform and building around platform has been very top of mind for me. Philip is also a technologist. He's constantly developing and coding different platforms and technologies. So he'll bring in a lot of perspective on that front. He's also a very big fan of philosophy and politics. So he has that perspective. And Noreen is a sociologist and cultural anthropologist. So we're bringing different perspective. I'm working more on the business side. So we all bring in different perspective. And as you can see, with different ages and genders that we have, we hope to share, different perspectives, and we will provide with you like what biases we're bringing. And the information that we're bringing are trying to be very unbiased and neutral. There's a comment section that, depending on what platform you're using, you can use to communicate with us. I'm constantly monitoring it. So if you would like to share any thoughts, insights, and opinions about what we're talking about, feel free to do so. What we're going to do is that we will read through it, and we will probably add it to the conversation. And, depending on, how the comments are, we may even select some of you to come in and share your insights with us in future sessions. So whether you're building a platform or you're just a user of all these platforms, we would love to hear from you what your perspectives are on these very controversial topics. So let's get it started. Noreen, why don't you tell us from the sociology perspective, what's the definition of social responsibility?
So social responsibility is a dimension of emotional intelligence, and it refers to our impact on people that we would likely never come in contact with because they're in need or for whatever reason. It's about caring about others, and it is both the desire and the ability to contribute to society, your social group, and the welfare of others. It's a basic human form of communication. It's kind of why we have governments or had elder councils in the past, because we are responsible for our entire society, not just ourselves.
Awesome. And what about when we are talking about these online platforms as a user? How do you define social responsibility?
So in terms of social media, it can be about the ethical issues. It's like what you post, like kind of like the idea of doing no harm, you know, not bullying, not giving out misinformation, as it, I think that both the platform itself and the users who are on that platform should keep in mind, is this going to, hurt or help? And how do I think about the greater good? So it really means being mindful of the type of content you share, and being either positive, uplifting, or sharing facts, instead of being toxic and spreading negativity.
Awesome, awesome. And so this is from the user perspective, like each of us can do it. Now, when we talk about the online platforms, the platform builders and governors also have their own social responsibility. So there are different areas to look at. I gathered different points by talking to some of these LLMs, and it seems like one would be safety, user safety. When Noreen just touched on like bullying, the cyberbullying has been a huge issue. Online harassment, like harassment has existed for so long physically, but now people have the opportunity to completely be anonymous and say whatever they want. So obviously, online platforms can do something about protecting the users on that front. The other side is content moderation. We see a lot of misinformation, disinformation, harmful content that we will go deeper into it based on the recent, news. But in general, content moderation has been a big challenge that, again, online platforms can do something about it. For so long, YouTube, for example, has been criticized that they're not really moderating extremist and harmful content on their platform. So that's one way to look at it. The other area that is also another social responsibility is transparency. We don't really know how these algorithms are playing, and they're impacting what we see. And we will talk about how traditional media is different from the social media in a bit. And you will see that this is completely new, and that's why our regulations need to be updated. But basically, we have no clue how the information are being shown to us. And so this type of, even it's not just like talking about social media, even these LLMs like ChatGPT, we have no idea how their algorithm actually works. And, the defense that they have is like, this is how the secret sauce of the technology is, so others can't copy it. But at the same time, there should be some level of communication to the users so they know what's happening. And also, when there are some sort of moderations, how this moderation is really happening. User need to know what is approved, what is okay, what is not okay, and so how these decisions are being made. TikTok is one of the ones that has been criticized a lot around their algorithm. Then, when we talk about misinformation, fact checking could be a social responsibility of a platform to really analyze what's happening, what are the sources of information that are being published on the platforms. And obviously, Twitter or X has been one of the most challenging platforms on that front. The other area of social responsibility that is a bit different is accessibility. We know not everybody has the same abilities. So how are folks with different abilities able to consume data and experiences the same way or the same quality? Many of these online platforms are kind of falling short into these areas. So, how they can, like in Instagram, you can see there's some work on like describing the image and stuff like that. So there's slow actions being made, but it's not fully there yet. The other area of social responsibility is diversity and inclusion. A lot of decisions that are being made through the moderation or algorithm or every aspect that we talked about is around who are these decision makers on the top. Are they coming from a diverse background? Are they really, because everybody comes with a bias. These biases are inevitable. So how can we make sure that these platforms are really serving everyone? It will come from having the right management and leaders and decision makers to be from a diverse background, and it will impact their policies and content moderation and so on. The other area is about data privacy. Obviously, that has been, again, a huge conversation in the recent years. And we see that users are complaining that why my data is being used without my permission, and why these platforms are selling our data. And the challenge is that these platforms are really missing the communication with the users, like what we're doing right now, trying to educate you all. They haven't been really doing it, and that's why people are kind of feeling that they're left alone and their opinion never mattered. And so it's very important to follow the regulations, but also communicate what's happening. And that brings me to another point, which is about offering education and digital literacy to the users. It's a social responsibility on the platform to communicate, to educate the users of how to using these platforms, how they're impacting us, and how they can stay safe in these platforms. We often see that technology moves faster than people can actually adopt it and have the cultural norms and understanding and common sense around it. So again, that's a huge social responsibility that has been neglected for so long. And the other part that platforms can do well is around community guidelines. Yes, we all sign those terms and conditions and stuff like without reading it. I know Noreen reads it, but most people don't read it. And this is the challenge. So how are these platforms actually making sure that you as a user really understanding the terms, the condition, the guidelines? Because you will be held accountable against those guidelines. So it's very important, like whether it's through gamifying it, whether it's through making sure this pops up in different times, not just in the beginning when you're excited to join the platform. So that's sharing the community guidelines and clearly communicating that is another aspect of social responsibility. Then environmental side. So we are talking about AI and all these technologies. They're using a lot of data, and these data centers are obviously using a lot of energy. We talked about blockchain before. Blockchain was questioned a lot around how much energy consumption they have. So all of these type of responsibilities are also part of the social responsibilities of these tech companies. And then being accountable about what they're doing to the world with their actions, their decisions. If there is a user complaint, which always there is, they have to cooperate, to make sure that users' needs are heard and addressed. And when it gets to legal escalation, they have to cooperate again. Sometimes if the content is violating the guidelines or is harmful, if they're too slow and they're not accountable for this, responsibility that they have, we're seeing a lot more challenges. The other aspect, which we will go deeper into it in a bit, is the crisis response. When there is a war, when there is something huge happening in the world, and we are getting this information from these platforms, it's a responsibility on the platform to be ready, to be there, and prevent from the spread of harmful content and disinformation and misinformation. So again, how fast they are going to respond, how responsible they are, is part of their responsibility. The other part is about ethical use of technology. A lot of people have concerns similar to the data privacy concerns, they're concerned about the ethical use of technology, like facial recognition. We see some countries are pretty okay with that because that's part of everything the government does to them, but that's not generally something that people are comfortable with. And again, maybe there is more education needed on that front. But defining the ethics and being on the same page with the users is another responsibility. And another interesting aspect is about supporting the local communities. We're in California right now, but there are also these tech companies happening every side of the world, mostly in California. When we see that a lot of these platforms or just billionaires that are behind these companies are avoiding to pay their taxes, whether on the personal level or from the business level. And so when they are finding these legal loopholes and minimizing their tax payments, it will impact the local economies of the around it. Obviously the rents go up and every cost is high here in the Bay Area because of these tech companies. Now they're not paying back to this, city and this region. That is another area that platforms need to consider. So those are like the areas that I found. What do you guys think, Noreen and Philip, in terms of our audience in the comments section? What do you guys think about these definitions of social responsibilities? Did I miss anything, or have you noticed something different?
I think that you did a really good job, telling people, what some of the, the supporting backgrounds are. I think that communication and education is a big one for me, because you and we've always talked about how people don't eat, like you said, in the beginning, they don't read the terms of use. They don't know that they're exchanging their data for the free platform. They don't know who owns their data, that if they publish on this website that they can't, many of them, you can't download it or use it for yourself. So I think that the only one that I'm passionate about that we didn't cover is that, that I guess it is in part transparency, but digital literacy and provide, because I think to promote digital literacy and educate users on how to navigate the world responsibly is important.
Awesome. What about you, Philip?
Yeah, I think it's always important to keep things simple. Right. I mean, I definitely believe in, your right goes as far as somebody else's rights ends. So being able to condense this information and communicate it in a way that's as easily understandable, digest as possible, I think is going to get the point more across. I think the problem nowadays, there's just a lot of things that are muddled, and it's actually a tactic, right, used by Russian regime and other agents, is they're not so much willing to change their minds anymore. It's more that they're looking to muddle the water and to sow discontent and distrust, right, and get at the root of democracy itself, right, the very foundation of how we govern ourselves. And I completely agree with Noreen in that it's all of our responsibilities. And that now I would actually argue that even social and digital literacy responsibility, I think, is a foundation of what it means nowadays to be a digital citizen, netizen, right, as some people have said before. Yes, we all had civics, we all had these things in class before, but it's a new world. And I think not only do we need to be better digital citizens, but also education is a component of this. Are we teaching kids in school how to be good digital citizens, right?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Now let's talk about this book, Ethical Dilemmas, that Noreen found. Share with us the opinions of the author and how it relates to what we are talking about.
Well, it's so interesting because, I was in approaching this topic, I was looking for, how, like, some information, and I've read a summary of the book. I haven't read the book, and I plan to order it. But there's a professor in Norway. I would say his name is Ovin Kalnes. I'm probably butchering that name, but in his book, he talks about that there are 5 dilemmas that each social company, and I think he's talking about businesses and people who are using social media as well as platforms. So, the first thing is the role, how people can have multiple roles and create confusion about ethical responsibilities. So it becomes unclear whether the person is professionally active on social media or acting as a friend or a client or a competitor, right? So this is, part of the scale of identity, and so, and it even goes into some things that are regulated, like the FCC regulations, that you have to say that this is sponsored content. If I'm endorsing something, then I need to say that I'm endorsing them. Or if I'm on as a person but I'm trying to sell my company's product, then that may, without people knowing that I work for that company, so we just, like, being who you are, and we all have different contextual identities, but and just being considerate of what you're doing and who you're talking to, and is important. The second one is tempo, which is that the social media exchanges happen quickly, and there's an increased risk of making mistakes. If you're responding to someone, whether it's in crisis management or, you're posting something without doing the due diligence, that is an ethical dilemma, because there can be problems with that in companies. And then integrity, which is, it's difficult to remain committed to your personal values and moral standards when representing someone's organization online, or being pressured to act against what your personal standards are. And then sometimes it's the opposite, people who are implying their moral standards rather than, whether it's religious or otherwise, on people, and not being unbiased. And then there's we touched on this a little bit, the idea of the freedom of speech. So what is okay to be active or not? And then the competence dilemma, when you're hiring like a outside person, or you're not that familiar with social media, and you're doing things that could harm someone through gaps of what they don't understand, in terms of also, like, playing the algorithm. So he's the book is Ethical Dilemmas of Social Media, and he focuses on these 5 ideas, and I think that it's pretty fascinating, that he spent the work to say, okay, these are the areas that we need to.
Did he also provide any solutions into how to address his dilemmas? Like,
yes, and in the book he interviews different folks that have addressed these kinds of dilemmas. And so again, I'm excited to purchase the book and read the book fully, but I wanted to bring it up today because these are things that I think add to the discussion of what social responsibility is and how we can do better,
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. So we looked into what's happening in the current world, and things that have happened in the past few years, And one article, we're going to go through some articles and gain different perspectives of the thought leaders, and then we will be also adding our opinions and thoughts on top. And we would love to hear from our audience in the comment section as well. The first article we're going to touch on is from Harvard Business Review. It's "Are We Entering a New Era of Social Media Regulation?" So they are talking about the violence that happened at the U.S. Capitol, and obviously it was very challenging. We saw how President Trump's social media was providing misleading information, inflaming millions of their followers, and causing this ban that happened on Facebook and Twitter. So that is an example of self-regulation of these platforms to prevent harm. And it was a controversial act because, again, is it freedom of speech? Is it not? What about the harm? We will be going deep into all the regulations in a separate session because there's a lot of educative content that we need to touch on. What is really freedom of speech, and what does it apply to, and what are the exceptions, and so on. So we'll be talking about that in a separate session. But for now, we're just going to talk about what's happening in the world and what these platforms have been doing. So when this ban happened, some people were saying, oh, this should have been done earlier to prevent the harm. Some were saying that this was just an action that these companies did to kind of take the side of the next administration that is more democratic, and they wanted to kind of go on that side. And so it's very interesting how there are different perspectives on that front. And the other part is about how the social media is different from traditional media. So they did a really good comparison in this article. In the traditional media, Noreen, you're probably more familiar than us, there was limited bandwidth. There was limited number of news networks. There was limited number of primetime windows. So everything was a lot more limited compared to now that is like infinite bandwidth. You can reach millions of accounts and you can personalize everything. So the other aspect that this traditional media is different from social media is the fact that there was a very strict moderation and oversight. We had, or we still have in the traditional media, producers that come from strong backgrounds and specialty in those areas that determine what the personality and viewpoint of that broadcast channel is, and then they will moderate and curate the content accordingly. But what we are seeing is that in the current social media, the platforms are just a conduit for the user-generated content. So they are really not held as much accountable. Third parties can't really hold them as much accountable, and so it's a very interesting dynamic. The parts that is also different is that we still can choose what information, what type of biases, and what type of sources of information we're choosing on the traditional media. And that is not necessarily the case on social media because we have no idea how the algorithm works. And they sometimes even randomly show us different information to see our reaction. And the more radical the post, the higher the engagement. And so that's another area that is very different. So we don't have as much control on what we consume in the current social media compared to the traditional media.
I would disagree on that a bit. So a couple of things on that point. One is there is another side to that because the algorithm's learning what you like and just giving you what you like and giving you what you like and giving what you like. You may think things are true that are not necessarily true or haven't been fact checked because you're only seeing things that confirm your bias. So with these algorithms, if you keep liking, they keep giving you more of the same, and you don't get any other perspective. So on the one hand, unbiased news sources are supposed to be just saying, okay, these are the things that happened. Where the traditional media news has kind of changed. Like if you watch one network over the other, you know, you can do the same thing, because news has become entertainment and not necessarily news, which is one thing. And the other thing that I'd like to talk about, or just touch on, is that the ability to publish content, we don't understand what the impact will be or has been yet. For example, when the Gutenberg press, the first printing press, happened, before that, only like the church and the king and people were the media. They would do proclamations. They owned the written word. And then when people had the ability to print whatever they wanted, revolutions started to happen. And that's what, it's sort of even in the Arab Spring and all of that kind of thing. It's like having the ability to publish your opinion. And because of the cost, prior to the technology, not everybody could have a show like we have today. We're doing that. We're creating our own media. And so the difference between social media and traditional media is both the way it is produced and the way it's shared. So instead of being one to many, like broadcast, it's more like a conversation. People are going back and forth, and each little individual is building their audience, and then it gets shared because each audience has its own audience. So it's very interesting that, it's media, shared media, the act of sharing makes it social. And so I just wanted to say those 2 points, because I think that it's relevant.
Yes. We were talking about this actually yesterday, how, previously we were just like in traditional media, we were just limited to what certain sources are giving us. But now this is very democratizing the information, and, examples like, what's happening in the revolution of Iran, like we see that we can actually see what's happening, more realistic information than what the government wants us to see. And so things like that are very good, positive side of this technologies, where people can actually have a voice. And it brings in their challenges as well. How are you going to moderate this? How are you going to still keep people safe and protected in this platform? So thank you for that. And one other part about traditional media versus social media is that they're both obviously profit driven. Now their methods of creating profit is different. So apparently in the traditional media, they were, because of all the limitations that they have, they were hoping to reach a broader market. And so they would avoid as much extreme content. And that's now different with social media, because they can actually get your information, personalize the type of content they want to give you, depending on who you are and what you will be triggered with. And so now it's even potentially more dangerous, and because they can be very polarizing. It can be hyper individualized and hyper polarizing to every individual, which wasn't possible before. So that's kind of scary, and we are seeing that happening around us right now. And so that's where we need to think about the social responsibility. And the platforms like Facebook and Twitter, by what they did by banning Trump's account, they were self-regulating to prevent some of these harms. But again, this is not going to end here. The government needs to also come in and support and incentivize these platforms to do more regulations. So that was this article. Very interesting, the comparison and the challenges because now these two types of media are so different. We can't just rely on the regulations that we had, like the I think it was what was the regulation called 230 that was done before in 1996, I believe. Let me pull it up. Section 230 of Communications Decency Act. So that basically is removing the liability or providing protection from the platforms against all the user-generated content that is provided on the platform. So this whole section 230 requires its own session. I was reading about it. There's so many details. There have been several acts that have been approved and executive orders on top of it to make some modification. But imagine what has changed since 1996 till now, and so much that needs to be updated. So we'll go deeper into that. And then obviously there's GDPR and other regulations in other countries. But in the US, that is a constant conversation that is being discussed. So the next article that we're going to touch on, unless, Philip, do you have anything to add to this article and this discussion before we move on to the next?
Yeah.
Awesome. So Philip is going to tell us about the next article, which is about...
So this is on the New Yorker. It's titled "How Social Media Abdicated Responsibility for the News." So as we know, about 10 years ago, this is so right at the beginning of the Arab Spring is really the first time that we saw social media take a center stage into the influence of itself in the world, right? And then last year with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we really saw how these horrors of war really started filtering into our world through these user-generated content, right, on TikTok especially. Ukrainian soldiers, for example, would film civilians sheltering in their homes, posting videos of tanks advancing, apartments being bombed out, etc. So really the volume and intimacy of these footage were unprecedented, and it quickly became dubbed the first TikTok war. Then in our recent history, 10 years ago, we've seen this eruption, more than 10 years ago now, but the eruption between Hamas and Israel, and how that's been kind of a second major war that we've seen in this new era of social media. But in the intervening years, social media has really changed in a surprising degree in how both of these have been shown. So, but across these major platforms, our feeds, they're less reliable, right? And authentic, crowdsourced news, mostly because of decisions these platforms made, right? For example, Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, now X, which is now under the ownership of Elon Musk, dismantled a lot of its content moderation staff, throttled the amount of news that the actual news publications were able to publish, and allowed anybody to really buy that blue checkmark verification, which prior to his administration was a signal of how trustworthy a channel was. Then also Meta, because of how much scrutiny they've had, really actually responded by minimizing the number of articles appearing in users' feeds because of the accusation of them spreading misinformation. And then also TikTok, under the scrutiny of the U.S. government, for its relationship with its parent company's relationship with the Chinese government, has really sought to distance itself from used content. But with this, especially with Twitter, journalists has kind of titled this an algorithmic driven fog of war, because of how much disinformation and mislabeled footage has appeared on X. For example, videos of a paragliding accident in South Korea this past June appearing, as something that happened during the war, which didn't. Footage from the Syrian Civil War in 2014, even video game content. I mean, video games have become so photorealistic, and that they're being passed, at least at a glance, with
AI and everything,
as near real life. then then you have Musk himself saying to follow two accounts, which they're not actual media companies, but then people would say to follow the war that's going on. But then days later, people point out that these channels are commonly spouting falsehoods, and then only then was Musk able to distance himself from it. But really, it's anecdotally, I've also kind of seen myself that this feed from one side or the other. For example, I haven't used TikTok that much recently, and I got curious, right, and see what's going on. But even with not that much on it, I saw that there's definitely a bias there from just a new user perspective, that knowing, is it because they know something about me or not. But and these platforms, to give them credit, they have done some work recently to try to stymie this. For example, Meta did launch their new social platform, Threads, which they aim to draw people away from X. But the head of Instagram and Threads himself said that their aim is to not get in the way of the content, but also not to amplify it. That, to quote unquote, to do so will be too risky given the maturity of the platform, the downsides of what we're promising, and the stakes. But some have said that they found the commentary on Threads more toned down than X. And also additionally, TikTok, they've done some things specifically by hiring staff that are fluent in Hebrew and Arabic to vet videos, working with agencies like Agence France Presse and Lead Stories to try to review. And interestingly, even some journalists are starting to even say that that the news, it's almost become, because they don't prioritize a lot, like apparently on TikTok, it's not by default to order news content chronologically, right? It's by relevance. So then just because you see something on your feed, it's not necessarily assumed that it's the most relevant, the most recent topic,
But on Thread, you can actually switch it. By default is based on the algorithm, but if people want, they can do it chronological, which is more suitable for news.
Yes. But, and the landscape is changing. There's new regulation, especially the EU is really, leading that charge. Specifically, they have the Digital Services Act, which went into effect this past August, which makes the social media companies themselves more liable. I mean, especially this one, where it says they can fine companies up to 6% of their global revenue for failing to moderate their content. And even introducing personnel liability for executives, in Germany, there is a law that was passed to that regard, right? Which I think, once it hits home, then I think they would take it much more seriously. But I think it's the importance of, right, it's getting that feeling of transparency and granularity, the importance of, for us to be able to control what is it that we choose to see, instead of being just completely subject to the whims of the algorithm. At least that way. Otherwise, it just becomes a sounding board of perpetuating whatever our basal instincts are, right? Especially in these uncertain times of war and atmospheres of chaos.
Yeah, this one was very emotional, like what happened with the Hamas and Israel war, and how like this misinformation went up to the president, and president talks so strongly about it. These are really sad. The rumors of Hamas actually decapitating the babies, that wasn't true. and the images that an account of Israel, official account of Israel on X, promoted, that wasn't actually showing that this actually happening, just some dead bodies of kids. And this was even used as an ad, fed to people, fed to users. So this is really sad. Like, there's no evidence that this actually happened. And some misinformation is coming from a verified account that was just bought and then used as an ad to feed to the user and engage their emotion. Like, this is just another level, not just the algorithm, but also now ads are going to force misinformation to us. So that's really, really challenging and sad impact of not having social responsibility and calling it freedom of speech. That is clearly not.
And it's sad because it muddles the truth. I mean, Hamas did commit atrocities against children, right? But to muddle it with certain exaggerations.
And all wars have some, impact on all ages and genders and stuff like that. But, kind of making this extreme case that is not true to just, again, radicalize people around one side over the other, that is the problem.
And that also happened. Britain sued Facebook over Brexit because they were intentionally selling ads for both sides. So within the algorithm, when you're making a Facebook ad, you can also follow other accounts so you can see what your competition is doing. So it was designed to be like, okay, this is a business like you, and this kind of ad did really well. But then when it comes to politics, when you're polarizing a country, like it's around leaving the European Union, and it damaged people. So there was a lawsuit for election tampering, in Great Britain, for not having any regulations or any person looking at what's being promoted as an ad. So when these things start to happen automatically, and there's no system of flagging it, and it does spread, misinformation or confusion, and it's the free speech thing. Well, they get to know what the other people are doing, so they'll, so then they're buying on top of that, and so they're profiting off of the conflict, which is what that lawsuit was about. So I think that there is a place where you shouldn't. The fiscal bottom line is not the end all and be all. Yes, you make money, but these people are billionaires. They're big companies, unethically selling advertisement and in traditional media. And it's supposed to be regulated on, by the Federal Communications Commission as well here. But with so many pieces of bytes of information, it is really hard to get human eyes on it, and these and there isn't any way to track what's happening on the self-serve platform.
Well, we see how AI is getting so advanced. There are ways, and these companies have the tools. They have the latest and greatest tools to know exactly what we want. They are listening to us. They are monitoring us. So this is something that they can actually do something about it. And I want to talk about the recent suit that was done for Meta, and really the fact that they knew about everything and then they didn't do anything about it. But let's go to the news that you had, Noreen, why ethics matter for social media, Silicon Valley, and every tech industry leader.
Yeah. I was looking at an article in Forbes where they interviewed Casey Fleischer. She's a researcher and assistant professor at the University of Colorado Boulder and an expert on ethics, and also went to the Vanderbilt School of Law. And what she is discussing is that that of course when people started building, like when Mark Zuckerberg was building Facebook in his dorm room, he wasn't really thinking about political implications. But now that it's 20 years later, we are aware, and and some of the things that have happened are purposely doing what I just said, putting the fiscal over the responsible. YouTube's algorithm overtly pushed conspiracy theories on its watchers as a way to boost revenue. They saw a dip in revenue, and they saw more engagement on the content that was conspiracy theories. So they shifted the algorithm that you would get a suggested story that had these conspiracy components to it, especially during COVID. So it was an overt attempt to push misinformation and theories that excited people. And like Nico was saying, like when you get these things and you're either sucked in and then they give you more and more, or you start to argue it, and the more there's controversy, the more people watch, and
it's all about engaging our emotions, right? From this psychology perspective, they're just trying to trigger your emotions, whether it's curiosity, anger, like things that actually make you do something, because that's engagement. They need engagement to make more money, to sell more.
Right, or even like we talked about a lot, X, formerly known as Twitter, selling check marks. Rather, it's a verification, just paying for verification isn't verification, right? So, and then they in this article, they also discuss that politics of selling information from both sides, and, purposely looking at misleading content or misinformation and not taking any responsibility, especially saying like, well, on the one hand, they want to own the content and the advertising against the content. And some of the platforms pay a percentage back but you have to have millions of views to make real money at it. And then on the other hand, they want to hide behind some of these regulations that says, well, that's not my content, that's just that person, and they happen to be on the platform. And you really can't have it both ways ethically. And so then, things like moderation and how important that is. We've all experienced a Zoom bomb or even in spatial, somebody coming in and just acting completely inappropriate, and understanding that if you're building something for business, you're responsible for like the psychological and well-being, and you're liable for whatever happens, whether it's harassment or overtly sexual content, or and so these companies have this plausible deniability for ethical concerns that which again leads to the same point that we're making, that there's a whole movement of people that say no, and then there's also finally the that mental health of younger users, which leads into what you're going to talk about with the Meta lawsuit, but exposing children and teens to content that harms their self-esteem, and creating unrealistic body standards, eating disorders, that kind of thing. So, why aren't we responsible? Why, we're all in this industry, we work in emerging technology. I've worked in the social media arena for many years, and yet, it still feels like the Wild West sometimes. And you'd think that caring for other people, because it's supposed to be social, would be something that people would lead with, but I'm not seeing enough of that. And that's my personal opinion, but I think we can do more. Is government regulation going to help? And to some point it will, policy changes and whistleblowers, but also just as people, standing up for, this is not the kind of toxic world that I want to participate in.
Yes.
I think I have a lot of comments to say on this too, because I think honestly the expectation of trying to shift this to labor, though, workers in companies to take up the mantle as their responsibility, I think in our capitalistic society.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, the root cause, I think, is that they're putting profit as the main priority.
That's what it is. And we should never forget that unless you're a public benefit corporation, and even then, how much teeth does that really have? A corporation, the director of a corporation, they're by law required to put profit motive above all, with the exception of certain things. But so I applaud the EU for taking the lead in this, because it's probably not going to come out of the US. But in the US, companies, they put profit first, and we see this even in the US, like IBM. During World War II, they pitted the Axis and the Allies against each other, in order to drive profit and grow themselves. So, and at least the system that we have now, it's, we can't really fault the companies for doing this 100%, because it is literally in their charter. So
well, where is the morality? Where is the humanity?
That's where laws come in, though, right? That's where the EU is leading charge. I mean, there is more regulation.
But what about as a human? Like, these folks, they all have children. They all have, I don't know. That's kind of very questionable for me. And like, you can do well by doing good. Like, they just choose not to. And the other part is, like, they never designed, like Noreen said, when Meta started, Facebook started, they were just doing it for college kids to select who is hotter, not really caring about anything of how it will impact the world, and will have at some point billions of users. But now that it's happened, like, even in the recent type of design, we're not seeing any consideration. Another good example of that is Horizon World. Why there was a rape in Horizon World? Why would avatars have a design option to be able to do that? Like, why people are allowed to harm each other? They could even beat each other, harm each other in this virtual world. So it's so fundamentally broken. And I think it goes back to, like, one, having the morality and social responsibility as a human and individual level that we started talking about. And then on the secondary side, like, having those diversity and inclusion and all those understanding. Okay, if that developer doesn't even think of this being a problem potentially, why don't we make these teams more diverse? Almost 50% of gamers in the US are now being women. So why they're not in the positions of developing and leading these companies and these projects? This is why we're not seeing even our VR headsets. Why is it that women are experiencing more nausea, more reactions? Because they haven't been tested on. This just has been very much biased choices. Everything we do, even look at Midjourney, how these platforms are trained in a very biased manner, that you only get skinny white ladies as beautiful. And so, again, but the reason we started with talking about the social responsibility at the human level, and then like how it applies to platforms, now you can see with these real life examples, they actually could do something about it, but they choose not to, because profit is the most important thing. And I want to quickly talk about the California and 32 other states that sued Meta just recently. So there was this episode on the 60 Minutes show that went live on June 4th. And that was just the beginning of these conversations that led to this recent lawsuit. And if you watch that show, you will see how sad, like, you know, like we all hear about, you know, oh, Instagram, it can be toxic. People put out a picture of themselves that is much better than their real life. These are all true. But when it gets to like these extreme cases and how these kids have been affected, there was a parent talking about how their child had so many eating disorders just because of seeing and comparing herself to these ideals on this platform. And it reminded me of my sister that she was doing that when she was a teenager. And it's really sad. Another parent were complaining about how their kid actually hung herself. She was a little bit depressed. She was 14, so with the age limit of Meta, she was allowed on the platform completely legally. And then one of her friends sent her a video that was published on Instagram about teaching her how to hang herself. And she literally followed that and killed herself. And it's super sad. And this was like the dad found out afterwards that this was the way she learned this. And you can argue, oh, she could have learned it other ways. But this video was proven that was still going around Instagram even a year and a half later after this incident. So how this was not flagged, how this was not moderated, how are these things happening around us and it's okay? And there was that whistleblower that we all heard of that in 2021, she talked about how there were several studies and research done. Meta is a huge company. They have all the resources to constantly monitor these things. And all of their employees can test this. And actually, one of their employees that was mentioned in the show went in and tried, accessing the platform by not having the age, because their validation of age is not validated by your ID. So anybody can say, yes, I'm above 30. And then you get in and then you get all the information that is not necessarily suitable for you. And so this is really happening and it has caused a lot of harm. About 22 million teenagers every day are logging on Instagram. And about 62% of teenagers in the US. And there's also TikTok and Snapchat and other platforms, but like the responsibility is huge on the shoulders of Meta. And the fact that the whistleblower documents and everything else is showing that they knew what's happening to the kids. And they still continued doing this and choosing profit over people and over morality, then this is questionable. And yes, there are obviously those Section 230 laws and stuff that can potentially protect them to some extent. But there are also so many directions that things that need to be improved because there is also federal children privacy law. Like they need to get permission from the parents. None of that has happened. There is no permission from the parents and stuff like that happening. And then on top of all of this, Meta was trying to launch a kid version of Instagram, which thankfully they put on hold. And, it is a very, very challenging discussion. And the fact that these states with very different kind of political directions coming together and choosing to go after this platform is saying something serious, that these kids are being impacted by anxiety issues, depression, all these challenges, and they are in a very sensitive part of their lives. So now this suit is coming from advocacy groups, lawmakers, parents. They're based on the show that I watched. They're not necessarily looking for the monetary penalty. They actually want the policies to change, and that's their hope. So yes, it could be some monetary reward, but it is not going to bring back the child that is dead, and a lot of harm that is being happening as we speak. So that is what's happening, and hopefully some of these will trigger some regulations and some actions and self-regulation from these platforms. And I want to quickly talk about what have these platforms done, and then we go to the fun part of the show, and let's talk about the sad part. Apparently, YouTube has shared a transparency report where they reported that they have taken down 8.8 million videos between July and September of 2019. And 93% of them were automatically removed by the AI, and 2/3 of them never got to be seen by any viewer, which is good. And they also removed 3.3 million channels and 517 million comments. So they're doing something. They have about 10,000 people monitoring and removing content and do policy development. On the Meta side, 35,000 people have been reported to be working on safety and security. And they said between July and September of 2019, they have removed 30.3 million pieces of content, and 98.4% of them were not flagged by the users. It was removed by those platforms. So they are doing something, but not enough. And we believe there is more to be done, and design for safety, design for security, design for social responsibility is what we are hoping for. And we will be talking more about other countries, which is very interesting. Like, I didn't know how Germany has a lot tighter rules and tighter, punishment for this kind of acts and activities. So we will be talking about those in more details. And again, I think as a user, as a parent, as a citizen of this world, and also a builder, you all need to know what's happening, because there has to be some level of social responsibility and understanding and digital literacy that we talked about. So, Noreen and Philip, do you guys have anything to add before we transition to the Halloween conversation?
Good discussion.
Well, thank you for bringing up the topic, and and I would love to hear more from the audience about what kind of actions they could be taken and what people want from a platform. And I hope that people, we are still going to be interviewing things about immersive experiences and emergent technologies on the Immergence Show, but we're combining those two words. We want to hear from all of you. That's the thing that I want to say. And we want to make changes, and we are building an immersive platform, and we want to do better. And so, and I think if we don't have these discussions and be transparent and have these discussions in public, then we are doing a disservice. So we really want to hear from the audience. We want to hear your personal stories, and we want to continue this discussion because it is, a passion of mine, Nico, a passion of all of us, even though sometimes we argue on the minutia of it or opinion about how to solve it. But I think we are people that are actively trying to do something different. So thanks for doing this topic, and I hope people enjoy it and come back next Tuesday. So
yes, we would love to bring you guys to come and share your insights with us. We try to avoid our biases and be very neutral here, but this is very near and dear to our heart, and we are building with passion. So if you have any thoughts and ideas on how to do better, we're all ears. We want to hear it, we want to do it better, and we want to share it with everyone else to also contribute to this. So today is Halloween. Noreen, what is Halloween? Where does it come from?
So it comes from the Celtic holiday Samhain, which is New Year's Eve. So in the Druid days, way back in prehistory, before the Romans came to Ireland, they never conquered, but they were around and they combined with us. So at the end of the year would be the end of the harvest, because we were I say we because I'm Irish. It was a very agrarian society, and so the goddess Calach, she would turn to stone at Beltane, and then and then Brigid, the goddess of fertility, would rule. But then Brigid would get very, very, very spent into the land to grow the crops, and then after the harvest was done, then the New Year's begins. So the New Year begins in the winter time, and so then they believed that the death was coming, the death time, the quiet time, the time of rest, and that the veil between the worlds was very thin in that transition, and so that your loved ones could come back and to the party and be there with you for a second. But if they recognized you, you could be taken back to the underworld, to the dead. Because so it was really important to dress up in different kinds of masks, or mostly animal masks back then, to not be recognized by them. To not be recognized, because you would want to. So that started the tradition of Halloween. We also have a tradition of making brambrak, which is a bread. And in the bread, there's a lot of things baked in, kind of like in New Orleans, they have a king cake at Mardi Gras. So there's a rag, a coin, a bean, a stick, and very dangerous to eat cake with a stick in it. But whatever piece of cake that you got, so this is kind of where the trick treats came in, you would tell your fortune. So if you got the stick, that means you're going to have an unhappy year in your marriage. If you got the rag, you were going to be poor that year. If you got the coin, you're going to be rich that year. So there's in a bean, you're going to have a baby. And so you would make the cake and you would eat it and share it. And then at midnight, you'd throw bread at the door to keep hunger out. So what happened was, why is it candy and cake stuff all over the world? Well, Pope Gregory in the 8th century designated November 1st, New Year's, as All Saints Day, because they couldn't stop people, even though they had converted to Catholicism, from celebrating the pagan holiday. And as Catholicism spread all over the world, different agrarian societies adopted All Hallows Eve and All Souls Day, as a time to celebrate and honor their dead. And so now it's a time where kids go trick-or-treating and have fun. But that is the history of Samhain, and so Happy New Year. And
that was amazing. Thank you, Noreen. And what's interesting when you're talking about this, that reminds me of another tradition in Iran.
Oh wow,
that's very interesting. And I just quickly looked it up. It's called qashoghdari, which is like spoon beating. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it comes from that region of Iran that actually Irish people transitioned out from. And what this is also very similarly, you cover yourself and you go knock on the doors and you ask for treats.
Oh, wow. That's so crazy. So anyway, that's another interesting thing. And so, the Gaelic, there's an area of Iran that is also Gaelic, and there are some, there's some history that that in prehistory, the people were walked across. They came the Gauls in France, and then came through, and the Druids, and so there's a connection, an ancient connection, but some things stick. So yeah, we discovering each other's society and being cognizant of how we're similar is also great social responsibility, because then you find common grounds. And one of the things that I love about the positive side is you can find common grounds and meet people from all over the world and find your place and feel well. So on the one side, there's this amazing connectedness that we have, and then on the other side, there's this deep harm, and we really as humans need to choose.
Yes.
Choose love, people. That's and have a great time tonight.
Yes, and we all met online. Philip and
Yeah.
I, Noreen and us, and we then ventured through the business and friendship and a lot more. So yes, there is so much good into these technologies, and we are technologists. We love it, but we just want to be conscious of the impact that we can have and we are having. So thank you so much for your time, for being with us in this session of our show. And we will be doing more of this. Probably next week, we'll go deeper into the regulations, because I know they seem boring, but we try to not make them boring. We make them more fun. We tell them as a story. We share them for you in a way that you can actually know what's happening in the world and how you want to build stuff in that field better. So thank you again. Please comment. Please message us if you have any thoughts, if you want to be on the show. We'd love to hear from you. And you can find us on any platforms. We are launching this at Chief Metaverse, and that's our organization. And also individually, you can reach out to us. Thank you again for your time. Happy Halloween, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.